Rossi-Marquez pact theory. The 2015 MotoGP championship fight is officially remembered for Valentino Rossi's clash with Marc Marquez at Sepang and the back of the grid penalty that cost him the title. But among riders, team members, and seasoned journalists, there's a deeper theory that refuses to die. The idea that Marquez wasn't just being a nuisance to Rossi for personal reasons, but that he had an unspoken understanding with Jorge Lorenzo. The suspicion is based on very specific on-track patterns. In several key races toward the end of the 2015 season, Marquez rode Rossi with extreme aggression, defending and repassing him relentlessly, even when it meant slowing both riders down. Yet when Lorenzo approached, Marquez often let him through with minimal resistance. The Valencia finale became the biggest talking point. In that race, Marquez followed Lorenzo in second place for almost the entire Grand Prix. He had the pace to attack, as his sector time showed, but he never made a serious attempt to pass, not even on the final laps, when tire wear should have given him opportunities. Many former riders pointed out that Marquez's racecraft is normally opportunistic. He takes every chance to pass, even when it's risky. The fact that he didn't challenge Lorenzo in Valencia, despite being in perfect position, fueled speculation. Rossi himself accused Marquez publicly of riding for someone else, calling it a betrayal of sporting integrity. Marquez denied any pact, insisting he was simply riding his own race. But the theory stuck because no one could explain why a rider of his aggression would settle so easily for second place in a race that decided the championship. Even today, certain journalists who covered the paddock that year will tell you, off the record, that the body language between Lorenzo and Marquez in private moments was different after that season, more relaxed, almost like there was a mutual respect that hadn't existed before. There's no smoking gun, but for many, the visual evidence from those final three races is all they need to believe. Capirossi-Harada team order theory. The 1998 250cc World Championship finale in Argentina ended with one of the most blatant acts of on-track aggression in Grand Prix history. Tetsuya Harada was leading both the race and the championship on the final lap, riding for the Aprilia factory team. His teammate Loris Capirossi was running directly behind him in second place. If Harada won, the title was his. If Capirossi won, he would take the championship instead. Heading into the final corner, Harada took the defensive inside line, making it almost impossible to pass cleanly. But instead of trying a legitimate overtake, Capirossi braked late, ran into the side of Harada's bike, and knocked him into the gravel. Capirossi stayed upright and crossed the finish line to take the title. It was so obviously deliberate that race direction penalized him after the race. But crucially, the penalty was not enough to strip him of the championship. The darker theory here is that this wasn't just an impulsive act by Capirossi. Some insiders claim Aprilia management wanted an Italian champion, and that Capirossi had either explicit or implicit backing to do whatever it took to secure the title. Harada's team manager at the time made pointed remarks to the press, saying he didn't make that decision alone. It hinted at a wider complicity inside Aprilia, where the national prestige of an Italian champion could outweigh the ethics of a clean fight between teammates. Over the years, Harada himself has spoken openly about the bitterness of that day, making it clear he believes Capirossi's move was premeditated. The footage from that race still divides fans. Was it a moment of reckless desperation or the execution of a pre-agreed plan? No official investigation ever addressed the team order theory, but for those who witnessed the politics of 1990s MotoGP up close, the suspicion has never gone away. Biaggi-Suzuka elbow theory. The rivalry between Max Biaggi and Valentino Rossi in the early 2000s was one of the most personal and bitter feuds MotoGP has ever seen. Their battles often spilled into verbal insults in the press, but Suzuka 2001 stands out as a flashpoint that fueled a theory about just how far Biaggi was willing to go. During the race, on the high-speed run down to the Casio Triangle, Rossi attempted to pass Biaggi at around 200 km per hour. Television replays appeared to show Biaggi deliberately leaning his body toward Rossi and making contact with his elbow, forcing Rossi dangerously close to the grass at full speed. Rossi later claimed publicly that Biaggi had given him an elbow to push him wide, an accusation that instantly made headlines. The official view at the time was that it was hard racing and nothing more. But in the paddock, many believed it was calculated intimidation. Former riders and mechanics who worked with Biaggi have said in interviews that he had a history of using aggressive body positioning as a weapon and that he took particular satisfaction in unsettling Rossi physically. This wasn't the only contact between them that day. Earlier in the race, the two had already exchanged paint in another aggressive move. The Suzuka elbow just fit a pattern that, to many, looked deliberate. Even Rossi's post-race celebration was colored by the incident. Famously, he stopped on the cool-down lap, gestured to Biaggi, and mimed wiping his nose, a symbolic insult in Italy. For those who believe the theory, it wasn't just rivalry. It was premeditated, targeted intimidation at one of the fastest parts of the circuit, where the consequences of a crash could have been catastrophic. Honda favoritism theory. Honda's reputation as MotoGP's most powerful manufacturer comes with an undercurrent of suspicion that's followed them for years, that they don't treat their riders equally. This theory gained real traction in 2018 when Dani Pedrosa, after more than a decade of loyalty to Honda, left the team under a cloud of frustration. Pedrosa's version of events was polite in public, but behind closed doors, he was far less diplomatic. He had long believed that Honda was prioritizing Marc Marquez with the latest parts, engines, and upgrades before offering them to him, if at all. During several test sessions in 2018, leaked telemetry sheets allegedly showed Pedrosa running older spec engines, while Marquez had the newest developments, including an upgraded chassis configuration and revised electronics maps. Even more telling was Honda's reaction when Pedrosa asked to test Marquez's setup. According to insiders, those requests were often delayed or denied outright, with explanations ranging from different riding styles to limited availability. By the time Jorge Lorenzo was signed for 2019, Pedrosa had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to keep racing for a team that treated him like a test mule for its star rider. The darker side of the theory is that Honda's favoritism wasn't just about competitive edge. It was about marketing. Marquez was a global phenomenon, young, charismatic, and marketable. Pedrosa, though respected, was quieter and less of a commercial draw. The theory suggests Honda made a calculated choice to push all resources toward Marquez to maximize both championships and brand exposure, leaving Pedrosa with a supporting role in his own team. Pedrosa's move to KTM after leaving Honda only added fuel to the fire. There, he worked closely on bike development and was credited with major progress. To fans who believed the theory, that was proof he'd never been the problem. He'd simply been starved of equal treatment. Melandri's Ducati protest theory. Marco Melandri's 2008 season with Ducati was a disaster from the start. He joined the factory team expecting to fight for podiums, but the GP8 bike he was given was twitchy, unpredictable, and, in his words, unrideable. From the opening races, Melandri's results were far below expectations, and his frustration was impossible to hide. But as the season wore on, his performance sank even further, and that's where the theory begins. According to some within the Ducati paddock, Melandri didn't just lose motivation, he deliberately gave misleading feedback during development tests. The theory suggests he exaggerated certain problems and downplayed others, sending the engineers chasing the wrong fixes. By doing this, Melandri could make a point to management that he shouldn't have been put on a bike he didn't believe in from the start. There's no official proof this happened, but there are oddities that keep the theory alive. Ducati's GP8 was competitive under Casey Stoner, who won races that year, yet Melandri couldn't get near the front. His feedback often contradicted Stoner's, and engineers reportedly complained about the inconsistency. The final straw came when Ducati decided to pay Melandri out of his contract early, to the tune of several million euros, just to remove him from the team. In later interviews, Melandri admitted that he'd mentally checked out mid-season and that he had refused to crash just to prove the bike was bad. For believers in the theory, that's as close to an admission as they'll get, that he used the season not to race, but to protest. Iannone doping politics theory. Andrea Iannone's 4-year doping ban in 2020 was officially for a banned anabolic steroid found in his system after the Malaysian Grand Prix in 2019. His defense was that he'd eaten contaminated meat during a trip to Asia, an explanation the Court of Arbitration for Sport rejected after months of hearings. To the public, it was a clear case of anti-doping enforcement. But in the MotoGP paddock, a darker theory circulated that Iannone's punishment was politically motivated. At the time, Aprilia, Iannone's team, was locked in tense negotiations with MotoGP's governing body over concessions. regulations. Aprilia was pushing for expanded testing rights and technical freedoms typically reserved for lower-tier manufacturers. Some believe that when Iannone's positive test emerged, the governing body saw an opportunity to send a message both to Aprilia and to the rest of the paddock about the consequences of stepping out of line. Supporters of this theory point to the severity of the ban. 4 years is exceptionally long for a first offense, especially in cases where the athlete claims contamination rather than deliberate use. Comparisons with doping cases in other motorsports show significantly shorter bans for similar violations. Aprilia's own leadership hinted at unfair treatment, with CEO Massimo Rivola calling the verdict unbelievable and a blow that has nothing to do with sport. While no formal link between Aprilia's political battles and Iannone's ban has ever been proven, the timing and harshness of the penalty have kept the theory alive. In a sport where corporate relationships can decide technical rules, some believe Iannone wasn't just punished for what was in his system, he was punished for the badge on his leathers. Wildcard testing loophole theory. The concession rules in MotoGP are meant to help struggling manufacturers catch up to the frontrunners. If a brand fails to achieve a certain number of podiums in a season, they're granted special privileges, extra engines, unlimited in-season testing, and, crucially, the right to enter wildcard riders in additional races. On paper, it's a fair system designed to level the playing field. But in the late 2010s, KTM's use of the concession system sparked a theory that they were gaming it to accelerate development faster than anyone intended. The suspicion wasn't just about how many wildcards they used, it was about when they used them. KTM often fielded wildcard entries late in the season, right before key upgrade deadlines, allowing them to test new parts in actual race conditions, while their rivals were limited to private tests. Rivals pointed out that race weekends provide real-world data that's impossible to replicate in private testing. The pressure, the tire wear, the fuel loads, the track evolution with a full grid. The darker version of the theory goes further, that KTM intentionally underperformed early in the year to avoid losing concession status too soon, ensuring they could keep exploiting wildcard entries for as long as possible. Some in the paddock claimed that certain development riders on KTM machinery were told not to push for big results in the first half of the season, protecting the team's concession eligibility, while the factory squad stockpiled upgrades for later. KTM has always denied any manipulation, and nothing in the rulebook technically forbids this kind of strategy. But the optics were suspicious. By the time their concessions finally expired, KTM had made massive leaps in performance, and some rivals quietly suggested that those gains were built on a foundation of rule bending that the mainstream media never wanted to frame as cheating. The 1990s grid intimidation theory. The 1990s were a wilder, less polished era of Grand Prix motorcycle racing. The paddock then didn't have the corporate gloss it does today, and some rivalries were settled off the track just as fiercely as on it. Riders who were around in that era, especially in the 250cc and 500cc classes, have hinted at a darker undercurrent, intimidation before the lights even went out. The theory is that certain riders, particularly those backed by powerful sponsors or influential team owners, had friends who weren't part of the official team. These men would linger in the paddock, in the hospitality areas, or even in the garages, and they weren't just there to hand out VIP passes. Their job, according to whispers, was to get in the heads of rival riders. Former mechanics have spoken, usually without naming names, about seeing tense confrontations near motorhomes or in service roads leading to the grid. A rival might be told that it would be better not to make certain moves in the race, or that it wouldn't be wise to fight too hard into turn one. These weren't threats that could be proven in court. They were the kind of insinuations that carried weight because of who was saying them and who they were connected to. Italian riders, in particular, were often rumored to have this sort of backing, given the passionate and sometimes political nature of their domestic racing scene. Nothing was ever officially reported in race coverage. The TV cameras stayed on the bikes, not the quiet conversations happening behind hospitality units. But for riders who experienced that era, the intimidation was as real as any on-track battle. It's a side of MotoGP history that will never appear in official documentaries. But for those who were there, the memory of being spoken to before a race remains one of the sport's unacknowledged realities.